it seems to be primarily, a lot of it for me is about social justice and just bringing awareness for people. So for several of my works, not just the trans lives ones, a lot of focus that I try to do is within community and social advocacy, and try to be voices for some of those people that may not be able to speak for themselves.
I think that in my work, spirituality and religion play very central roles. I was raised in, of course, in the deep South in Texas, in a very strict evangelical, homeschool, conservative setting. And I think that a center point of the religious culture that I was raised in is distance and longing. And that, I think, has blended so much and been so intertwined in my own queer experience, my own coming out experience, longing for a life or an identity that I didn't think was possible to claim. And the more I sit and the more I work and the more I reflect on my work, the more I see that sort of spirituality of longing is so deeply intertwined in the work. And coming from Houston, particularly such a flood zone, that has popped up again and again. The ecological change and the climate change affecting my home has popped up over and over in my work. And it's not work that's in this show, but I did a mini series on flood damage after Hurricane Harvey affected my family so closely, so that ecological shifts and how that affects the spaces that we live in and the spaces that we call home is also, something that weighs on me a lot with the work.
I guess like with my work, it was really interesting going from Mississippi and living in Mississippi and that kind of scene, if you want to call it that, just political, socioeconomic scene, and then going from that to a place like Portland that's, very much more into some social advocacy and social justice. And there is just night and day. And so I made this, this was one of the first works I made while I was here in Portland for grad school. And I really kind of dug into like analyzing like what is like Southern imagery, especially for like a white, queer person, and what does that look like, and how do I come to terms with where we're at now, and how that imagery is still like informing a lot of my identity, but it's also morphing and changing. And I wanted to see like how I could capture that changing part in my work. I don't know how much I achieved it in my piece, because I focused on like kind of taking it's my grandfather's shirt, and I saw it as like this object of like a generation that dealt with a lot of horrible things going on in the South. And he kind of, to me represents a lot of the more like shameful parts of that history. And so how do you take that object and acknowledge it, but also make it into something new? And that's kind of been a lot of the interesting parts that I've been trying to struggle with and like achieve in my art. And in terms of the ecology of it, I mean, I've been fixated on kudzu personally for a hot second. I don't know anybody that can ignore the beauty and the monstrosity that is kudzu, and the implications. And I've been thinking about kudzu in a lot of different regards, in terms of like xenophobia, but also like something that's unwanted, that's like growing and leaching. It could be the progressive agenda, it could be anything. I think when you look at kudzu and you kind of look at the movement of like species, invasive species across America, that could be anything, right? And kudzu is kind of like one of those pieces of imagery that I really stick to, that I've been thinking about a lot lately since getting back in school.
So yeah, for me, my piece, I think it plays into all those aspects, and maybe not this particular piece. I mean, the piece that's in the show obviously speaks to a lot of political issues, a lot of social issues, but also I grew up in the Bible Belt. Like I'm one side of my family is Catholic, the other side is Southern Baptist. And I think it took me so long to speak about some of these issues that we have with rape, gender violence, things like that, domestic violence. And I started making this in the middle, right when the Me Too movement was happening. And I think what silenced me for years was religion, was my very conservative upbringing in the conservative Bible Belt in Louisiana and in Arkansas, coaxing me in this idea of you shouldn't speak about these things, you should forgive, so they played into each other, where I had this moment where I was like, no, I'm going to talk about it, I'm going to make this piece. And so it was, the piece for me was also like me, I don't want to say rebelling, is that the right word? Yeah, I'll say it, but it was me going against that religious upbringing, indoctrination, conservative, fundamentalist Christianity that I grew up in, and kind of saying, no, I can speak about this. It's my story. It happened to me. And then I opened the door for other people to make this statement with me. And that's how I got the clothes donated to, sew the piece together in the end. So they all played a part with each other. They were like working mechanisms together. Thank you.
The idea that in like religion, in kind of more conservative religion, we have security and safety. And so that if we repress like a certain part of ourselves, by repressing that certain side of ourselves, we are ensure like safety, but it's all kind of an illusion, this like illusion of perfection to like disguise basically like a toxic environment. And so we're kind of like forced to change, to force this mold of like safety, when that safety doesn't actually exist in that kind of environment. So I think of like conversion therapy. I think of general shaming of wanting, to be with somebody, but you can't. And so you're told because you're kind of pulling away from a certain thing that you're going to be wrong by choosing that, you're not going to be happy. But when that is the exact opposite. So kind of like the hush hush nature of it all that I grew up more around. So I'm lucky to have a family. I'm still pretty young. I'm still in undergrad college. So I'm lucky to have a family that's supportive, but my hometown is very talk behind your back type of place. And so I do see a lot of illusion. Nobody's really upfront about their political beliefs, but they're definitely passive and aggressive about it, which I think can be more harmful, not more harmful, but just as harmful. Thank you.
Thank you. And I was wondering, would anybody else like to speak on that?
I'll share a little bit. My work, I think, definitely revolves around spirituality, or there is an element to it. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, and I grew up very deep, like within the faith, and for a long time, I was like trying to not be queer and not be gay, and so it took some time to actually figure out and come to terms, and now I kind of see some of the work that I do as someone else said the word rebellion. I'm sorry, I don't remember who exactly, but someone else said that, and it is a little bit of a rebellion against my upbringing and what I was taught. And queerness now, I feel like, has sort of become the spirituality that I can have, because that other spirituality I can't be with anymore. And so it's sort of a way, queerness is a way of celebrating myself within that spirituality. So, and I think my piece, the piece in the show has a little bit to do with the idea of concealment, and especially ideas of like, in that time period when I was struggling with my self-identity, the idea of concealment and concealing myself from other people. So
yeah, I would love to like piggyback off that, because I definitely resonated with what you said about queerness being this kind of new form of spirituality for you. And for me, in a lot of my work, not so much the works that were in the show, but my my other personal work has very heavy Christian like symbolism and themes in them, and my work in the show is very heavy in like Americana imagery and themes. I appropriate the flag and the idea of the cowboy and stuff. And I think for me, a big driving factor for all that has been kind of reclaiming all of these aesthetics that have classically kind of pushed me out and my community out. And it's especially interesting to me with Christianity, because growing up I was raised Quaker, and there's a lot of love within the Quaker community and a lot of like anti-violence and just things that I really agree with. But when it came down to it, like I was too gay to still be in the church. And so having all these like things I kind of agree with in the religion, but then being like shunned from it, you know, trying to take what I can from it and apply that, and kind of, I don't know, just with my own transition, I've seen so much of the love and like that kind of radical love that they preach. And so I see similarities between like my own trans experience and like the values, some of the like innate values of Christianity. And I'm very interested in what happens when those two worlds kind of can meet eye to eye. So I try to make these kind of subversive images that center queer people, but are that someone who has like kind of more religious sensibilities can still kind of connect to. So that's what I'm really kind of after with my work.
I can say a little bit about rebellion or subversiveness. I'm always fascinated by the feeling of, well, this is natural, or this is the way things are. A lot of my work deals with architecture or the planning of cities and things that you pass by all the time and you don't really think about, and they tend to be things we just kind of assume are given. And that's kind of was my growing up and thinking about what a family looked like or what relationships looked like. It's like, well, it was, you know, to have a nuclear family with a man and a woman, and then sort of feeling like, well, that doesn't fit with what I want. So that kind of like trying to find those things that feel like they are just the way that they are, and then trying to like crack them or turn them on their side or somehow subvert those to make people see like, oh, it could be a different way.
I work mainly with analog photography practices. I like using medium format film a lot when I'm shooting with someone, and that is like directly related to my identity. A big part of why I do photography and why I take portraits is so I can connect with people. Growing up, it was like my in to kind of get to know people. It created this kind of barrier between me and the person to where we can have this experience together, but you know, there's this, it's kind of like arm's length or length to the person, but I could still connect with them and connect with people that I wasn't really comfortable connecting with because I was queer and I didn't know how it would really go. And now in my practice, I continue using film because I love the instance of like just being with a person, not worrying about what the picture's looking like on the back of the camera, just kind of creating and documenting a moment with them. And so even though a lot of my works are scenes and portraits that I've really like premeditated and like detailed out, they're still so like the image in my head usually is not the image that happens because I want the other person to give and take to my camera and create like a moment with them, a moment that they as the individual are existing in, even though it comes from my mind. And so it ends up with all these kind of more heightened, stylized, romantic, kind of dramatic portraits of people that are still, I hope, come across honest and like kind of like a dramatized retelling of my own story and my community and all these kind of characters in it. Because everyone I photograph too is directly in my life. I don't really seek out models. They usually come to me. So it's really I love what I do. I'm so blessed to do what I do. I think it's so cool to kind of connect with people in that way, and then have like an object to kind of rejoice over at the end of the process together. It's really cool.
For a lot of my processes is very much, I'm very much a planner. So part of it is intuitive, but a lot of it is about doing research. With a lot of my fiber pieces, there's a little some meditative aspects to it when creating the pieces, because there's a laborious process that has to go within domestic labor and stitching and things like that. And I do both hand stitching and other aspects that are digital embroidery. The trans lives, that one in particular was digitally embroidered. And I kind of connect in what Carmen was saying in regards to photos. There's another series that I'm working on, queer performers during the pandemic. And so my photo process is a little bit different, where it's a little more intuitive, where like the fiber process, it's very much about needing to do research, kind of doing like word maps, like you do when writing, and trying to find ways of other aspects that connect, using the medical gauze to stitch the portraits on, in particular, to have a conversation in regards to how a lot of people in our community are essentially bleeding out, is essentially why I did the red thread on the medical gauze and using the red fabric behind it and have it kind of bleed into the ground. So for me, it's trying to find word maps that connect in ways that speak a little bit deeper than just how I take portraits, and more so seeing where somebody is. So.
Thank you, Cher. Next up is Adrienne, and then Nate, and then ME.
Thank you, both Carmen and Cher, for your answers so far. I am especially fascinated by hearing Carmen speak about photography. I started as a photographer and made this switch to painting at some point about 7 years ago. And I think that switch in medium had so much to do with me becoming more comfortable with owning my sexuality and owning the future that I want for myself. For me, as much as I loved photography and I love the sort of, the community aspect of doing photography in a lot of ways, I kept finding this physicality missing for me, that I wanted to reach out and touch the thing, and I wanted to make an image real for myself with my own body. And so whenever I started painting, I got so physical with the work and used my hands so much, and would come out of the studio completely covered in things that are probably toxic. But there was something about making it real to me. I think as a bisexual person, feeling not real and like I don't exist for so long, there's something about working so physically with painting and making something real that, I don't know, I know that real is not the right word because photographs are real as well, but there's something about the tangible that feels so powerful to me and feels so linked to the subject matter of longing and future building that is so woven into the work.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. Hello, Nate.
Yeah, for this piece, I usually do a lot of digital work, but this piece was sort of mixed media and physical, and it was photography, and my mother, she quilts a lot, and so this piece called Fly Mask, where I sort of wove together these Polaroid photographs. In a way, this piece is sort of both a love letter to my mother and sort of a confrontation towards my mother, because of the fact that I'm referencing her quilting language, and I specifically wanted this piece to sort of look like something sewn together like a quilt. But the subject matter is, of course, me in a sort of in a very queer aesthetic, wearing a lace hood, referencing sort of a BDSM idea, and so this piece it evolved in a weird way for me. I didn't exactly know what I was making whenever I started out making it, but I think just the way in which it it speaks to quilting. And I know quilting is like, that's something that happens everywhere, but I also think quilting has a very regional sort of Southern quality to it. And I don't know, it came out in an interesting way that I was pleased with in the end. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
I guess, jumping off what Adrienne was saying, I am a painting and drawing. I'm going to painting and drawing study in school, but I personally enjoy making my found object pieces. And so I find a lot of my stuff around like my house or my hometown because it's cheap. But also I have that personal connection to it. And so it's kind of like taking a history of like myself, who I was. A lot of these objects are like 10 years old. Sometimes I like go to my hometown like dumpsters and see what like instruments they got lying around. And in a way, I feel like I'm transforming myself and kind of the object that I'm working with to represent a part of me now. And my sexuality is definitely an important part of who I am now. And so I feel like it kind of represents a sort of way of how I guess the queer community now and me are continually evolving and discovering themselves and kind of what they want to say. And I also feel that very physical connection towards like a sculpture I make rather than a painting, because the painting I'm definitely more physical, but since it's flat, it's kind of like photography is one level of involvement, painting is another, and then making sculptures, you're just like all in it. And so I guess that for me, I'm still exploring what type of art I like to do. And so right now I kind of gravitate towards a lot of different things. And so I feel like that's also represented kind of like me exploring like my pansexuality and kind of what I am into and who I like to be around as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. I'm going to call an ME next.
Yeah, so I guess material wise, I have a shirt, and I think I mentioned earlier that it's a shirt from my late grandfather, and he passed away before the pandemic really like started to gain trajectory. And so it's kind of been a weird, this object and these shirts, you know, he has a lot of them that I've collected. These objects have kind of become like a weird medium to deal with grieving, but also dealing with a different kind of grief in terms of like there's the loss of a family member, but also loss of like kind of, I guess like I'm in my mid-20s. I'm coming to that time where I'm learning like, wow, everything you thought was a thing is now turned upside down. And I don't know which way is like, you know, up anymore when it comes to, you know, what I believe, how I feel about, you know, myself and, you know, the world around me. It feels like it's always been so cultivated in a, you know, a conservative white Christian, you know, whatever you want to call it, bubble. And so these shirts have kind of been this meditative process in terms of like looking at them and really looking at like thinking about like what makes identity and what do we use to like protect ourselves, and also like, you know, the gesture of like shopping for shirts, like that's something that, you know, I did with my father is you know, shopping for men's shirts, that we would just like freak out over the quality of like a nice button down shirt. I mean, it's really silly, but that's a pastime of mine. And so it's just interesting to think about like clothing in that way and clothing as a symbol, and think about like how you can, I think I said earlier, you know, reconstruct it and, you know, not necessarily destroy the narrative that is, you know, a working class white man who used one too many racial slurs in his lifetime. But, you know, how do you say like, I see that and I see where I come from, but this is where I want to be now. And so it has a lot to do with, you know, I think we've touched on the racial element, but also the queer element in terms of like, do I want to, you know, continue this kind of strict narrative in like, you know, the 1950s, you know, nuclear family, everything's very binary and very defined. And so it's kind of been a joyful process taking this object that should be revered, you know, like this is a shirt from a loved one that's now passed. And now I'm like, I'm going to throw paint on it and glitter and they can't do shit about it. Sorry if I can't cuss, I'm sorry. I apologize for my language, but all that to say, it's been fun because I've kind of just, you know, really unleashed myself and just said, if you like something that you think is fun and colorful and loud and everything that I don't feel I am, just go for it. And so it's kind of been a very, I don't know, it's probably more than you guys were looking for, but just this very like visceral, you know, no holding back and really, really indulging in like what visually pops out to me, but also what uses language that feels like it can speak for me in ways that I couldn't all the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emmy. I saw in the messages that Parks has a follow-up question for Adrienne, so I wanted to give some space for that.
Hi. Okay, so I guess circling back a tad to Carmen's initial response to the question and then Adrienne's follow-up about, I guess, the tangible with art and making like what you said was the real and having a background in photo, but now using your other mediums. I'm curious what your photo background was and if it was more digital or more analog, and if you had that experience like in a dark room and being able to go in and like physically make like the photographs, if that makes sense, and kind of like that whole process for you during.
Yeah, totally. I started photography with both digital and analog. I started taking analog courses when I was young and doing digital photography, but basically I worked with both and ended up gravitating toward the digital because I was able to create more what I wanted to. The photography I did started out as more straight up photography, but by the end of my time working primarily digitally, I was creating these elaborate canvases in Photoshop with hundreds of layers and making these digital spaces. They were kind of like bodily digital spaces that I was constructing. And it got to the point where I wanted so much to be in some sort of contact with these bodily landscapes that I was making, and doing it through a screen or even doing it, trying to make this happen in the darkroom just wasn't cutting it. So I ended up stepping away from the computer and from the lens and sticking my hands at some goop and carving out images that way. But I mean, I think that there is so much physicality with photography, but I think that the types of physicality offered just they weren't cutting it for me in the way that made sense to me. So yeah, I moved away and I'm still doing oil on canvas and still sticking my fingers in stuff. And yeah, having this sort of one-to-one human scale with the paintings as well versus working on a tiny lens or a tiny screen. Being able to face something that's my size and look it in the eye is, I don't know, there's something so, I guess, so spiritual about it.
I would love to, sorry, I'd love to piggyback off that though, if that's okay. I definitely like really resonate with the idea of like this physical object having so much like spiritual weight, especially as an artist and someone who does work in photo. And a lot of my processes are kind of blended between analog and digital. I photograph analog and then I digitize the work, and what I end up with though is these kind of framed pieces, because like Adrienne, I really value the idea of having like this hands-on like thing, like this object, this precious, unique, individual object at the end of like my entire process. I think is really cool. And I don't know, I just love it. And I just wanted to add that because I see you, Adrienne.
I will say, yeah, kind of jumping off of both Adrienne and Carmen. this year I've started kind of experimenting around digital painting, and it is both an amazing world and also terrible because you can get so close and so detailed and so perfect, but it takes so much longer, and you kind of lose that kind of human element. And so I kind of wonder, well, I feel like I have more control over kind of the digital world. I have less control over my physical pieces. That somehow makes them just as much or even more unique. So kind of what are your thoughts on that, Adrienne? And I guess Carmen too.
I don't want to take Michael's spot, so I'll be really quick. As far as the question of like, the question was basically about uniqueness and individuality of the object.
I guess, do you feel like in a way you have more control over your, I guess, digital photographs or your paintings, or do you have more of a connection to either? I guess the way you talk about it, your physical ones, but do you feel like you have more control of your digital pieces and your photographs?
Absolutely. I think I had too much control, and that's part of the problem. I'm not formally trained in painting, so a lot of this is kind of flying by the seat of my pants and figuring it out. I think that the digital became so sterile for me because I got really good at it, and I taught Photoshop, and I could have an image in my head and execute it exactly as I thought. And then it was done and it was perfect. But the messiness and the ever evolvingness of oil paint and the deep frustration of not knowing what I'm doing half the time, I think is really important to me.
Yeah, I totally agree that my sculptures, I kind of have like an idea, like where I want to start, but then kind of the mediums, what I'm working with, kind of what the object is physically able to do, what it can like withstand, all determines the final outcome. And usually the final outcome is not, it's a version of what I had in my head. And that's all the more exciting.
What led me to make the work that I made for the show, because I worked with photography for a long time, and I'm used to that medium being working in response to or relationship with things out in the world. And I kind of found myself in this situation where I had been researching the history of mineral springs and reading about what they once were, when people from all over would gather and come to these public bathing situations. And I was like, oh, this is like, feels like a bathhouse. Like this, it feels so queer, but this is 1800s, and we're not using that language historically at the time. So I wanted to photograph something that didn't exist. And so that was the struggle, was how do I make a document of this historical thing that I'm just inventing or imagining. And that's what kind of led me ultimately to use the AI image generation, because it would sort of take thousands of reference material and mash them together in kind of an unexpected and surprising way, in the way that, the kind of like working with paint or working with other materials, you're not quite sure what you're going to get. And so that's how that was sort of the problem I was trying to tackle, was like, how do I make a photograph and still like have that documentary quality, but of something that maybe never existed.
Just to add to what everyone's saying in this very, I guess how this object-oriented thinking of your materials, because I think of my piece like that specifically. My piece, why I chose these materials to work with fiber, to work with clothing specifically, it's two parts for me. One part was, as everyone's saying, these objects seem to carry an energy for me. It wasn't a good energy though. It was something I needed to cleanse and reclaim for myself. So I felt, and also what everyone else is saying, I went to college, I got my degree in graphic design, and also I'm a painter, but I had this idea for years and years and years. But the other part of my issue was I don't know how to sew. And sewing and embroidery and quilting, there's a lot to unpack there for me personally, because where I'm from, all the women, all the cishet women, they sit around and they quilt and they sew. And I rejected that for so long because, even as a kid, you're different, you're queer. I knew I was, different. I didn't want to sew. It's just because that medium has always been long associated with, you know, kind of this domesticity of being a woman's thing. And I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to braid my hair. I didn't want to learn how to sew with my grandmother or quilt with her. And I rejected that for so long. And then it's just that it's how this medium has such gendered connotations, but also in the term in society, but also in the terms of art, you know, even in art, it's seen as a lesser inferior medium as well, because it's always been associated with women's work. So I had to teach myself how to sew just to make this piece. And there was a lot there for me to unpack and how to learn it. And then also the object itself, the clothing, had this energy that I kind of wanted, you know, I saw the own clothes that I wore hanging in my closet every day, and it wasn't a good feeling. And I wanted to get rid of that feeling. And that's how this came to be. So that's why I chose the mediums. And I had to teach myself how to sew and reconcile a lot of my own issues with my gender identity, my queerness in the process of doing that.
I have to say I connect a lot with what Kesha's saying, because I grew up, my mother does alterations. And so sewing was very much a part of my household. And so I didn't want to sew either, didn't want to deal with anything fiber related. And essentially it was the idea of subverting the stitch. I lean more towards being masculine centered. And so for me, you know, that's not something that generally someone that's masculine centered would gravitate to, dealing with something that is more connected with someone that is more feminine. And so in ways for me, it's subverting the stitch of trying to grasp onto something that's feminine and something that's soft and that takes time, as opposed to some of the more masculine things. But I love fibers in that way. And I never thought, I've only been doing this for about 3 or 4 years and really have gravitated towards it.
Yeah, my medium is photography. First of all, hi everyone. Thank you for being here. This is so exciting. But yeah, I grew up south, like border town, Hidalgo, Texas. So it's just right next to Mexico. And there, like, I wasn't really pushed into the arts, or just there wasn't much information, or I didn't really know what it pertained to. For me, like, art was just mediums such as painting and like drawing and such. So I never knew that something as photography could be considered art or any of that sort. And then I moved for college 8 hours away and I started learning so much about just me and like myself as like as a queer person. And then obviously being Hispanic, it was just like so many things that I was taught that just as an adult, I was just like, oh my God, like there's so much more out here, and just finding a way to express it. And that was, you know, through art and photography. And yeah, the pieces that are in the show, they are all scans, they're physical. And I think at that point, it was just, I was having trouble just growing as a creator, because I graduated with a film major, and just visual art has always been something that I've been passionate about. And at a point, it was like, I don't know what else to do. Like, there's only so much color grading to a photo. And then I decided to print it and make multiple prints, and then it just went ham physically. And then I just created these collages. And then that's, I think after that point, it was like a shift. And as a person, like where I was in my life, and also just like creatively. But yeah, I think it definitely had to do with the fact that I didn't grow up around the concept of exhibitions and all this new world that I got introduced later in life.
And then my piece that was in the show was a Xerox transfer on watercolor paper. I consider art like a creative practice, just because like my professional practice to make money is graphic design. And sometimes I think it can get a bit monotonous doing flyers or logos, and I feel like often I have bigger things to say than those things. So that's where art came in for me, and learning it in programs at university and learning Xerox transfers. So to take something very digital based and putting it on, you know, a canvas in a way, that's kind of what led me to art making.
I know for me, I didn't come out until my mid-30s. And so, and I'm in my mid-40s. And so a lot of, for me, I guess being queer was more so of a push to feel more free to express my creativeness as a queer person, and making sure there was representation. I also produce drag and burlesque shows, and a lot of that is community based. And so that very much helps encourage me by working with my performers. They encourage a lot of my work and inspire a lot of my physical work or photography work, just by watching them perform on stage. So within just being within the queer community, there's a lot of inspiration that I find and want to continue to push my creative aspects. More so is about representation. So I would agree, for me, it's definitely, it's pushed me to want to create more.
I would have to say that like the whole reason I'm an artist is because I'm queer and trans. I've faced a lot of like job discrimination, and so I really don't have an option but to be a freelancer and to make art and to do I do freelance portrait work on the side just for whoever likes my work and wants a picture taken by me. But yeah, I just think like talking about like isolation and stuff, I mean, I just don't get hired, and it's usually because I walk into a space and I see how they see me, and I immediately can tell if I'm going to get a job or not, just based on how they size me up and down in the space, or even on a Zoom call or anything. So yeah, being queer has totally impacted like why I'm an artist. It's the whole reason I'm an artist, but I'm really grateful for it. I really love my life and that I get to do this for a living and that I'm my own boss. So, you know, it's pretty sick.
For me, especially when we talk about like the geopolitical context of growing up in the South, for me, there were so many other intersecting things with my queerness, like class, finances, accessibility, because for me, it wasn't what persuaded me from being an artist. It was more, I didn't think that was even an option for me. The town I grew up in, the population was 711 people. A very small rural town in Eastern Arkansas. They got flooded a lot, and no one went to college. Like, no one were doctors and lawyers. I didn't have any of these options. I didn't even know, what a career was. My mom worked at a gas station, and some of the people in my family and around me didn't even finish high school. So I didn't know I was even an artist. And the only reason I went to college was because I was a basketball player and I got a basketball scholarship. And that kind of saved me and opened some doors. I left home, I went to the big city, the whole story, in your little country town. And that's when I came out as queer. That's when I realized it took me 3 years to even decide to major in art. When I was in college, I didn't even know. So I think when you talk about the context of the South, you also have to look at these other factors with accessibility. We're not considered cultural havens by any means. I don't even think I went to an art museum growing up. I don't think there are even nice ones, even in a close proximity to where I was raised. So it wasn't taught to me that this was an option. So I didn't learn that I was even an artist till later in life, till I was in college.
I kind of feel like being queer and being an artist have kind of a similar way of being, where you kind of act and function differently than kind of, I wouldn't say the rest of the world, but the rest of like careers and also like the world. So kind of like, as a queer person, there's not as many spaces where I can like openly go to and be sure that there are other queer individuals. Like a lot of people, or people who are heterosexual can definitely go out in the world and are sure that the people they meet are heterosexual, but I feel like my guard is definitely always up. But when I am around people I know are queer, they're people I know are like me and people when I can think like me. And I also think, like, as an artist, there is an element of isolation. Like, I'm going to be stuck in my house for 2 weeks because I got a last minute commission. It's really big and I messed up, so I have to start over. But kind of when I can meet with the artist, like other artists, I can kind of have these discussions about how art processes and how they're much different than other people, how other people go out and have a space, or other queers have like careers, have space where you can go to like an office to function. But as an artist, to focus, to kind of go in, you are kind of isolated by yourself. So I kind of find those parallels between like myself being an artist and being a queer person in the world. And I guess a queer student artist as well, because I'm not really meeting up with my friends to study. I'm kind of locking myself in my studio to finish things. But I think y'all can relate to staying up just to finish a piece or two.
It's like so much of us, or all of us growing up queer in the South, but arts are, I feel like, usually at the bottom level, especially of funding when it comes to public education. And so it's like, if we do have some sort of door to open or to walk through to be introduced to the arts, like it so often is either non-existent or they want to make what little bit of it non-existent. So I guess what prompted my question was Carmen talking about her career as a photographer. What is perhaps a defining line between, and you may not have one, but the defining line between your career and your job? And like you were saying, you'll do the portraiture for the people that come to you and they're like, I like your style, like that's what you do. But then you also had mentioned shooting your close circle and having, I guess, the intimacy heightened with being like, what was it? Lens length away was the reference.
I consider all the work I do with my camera artwork. That's my paintbrush, you know, like that's my medium. And so the work I do for money, I consider commissions. Like I consider that as if like back in the day, if someone went to a portrait painter and was like, hi, I want this portrait made of me. That's what I do with my camera and my film. So I consider it all artwork. And I think the time I started like really considering myself a professional artist was like, I mean, it depends on the day. Like today, honestly, I had like a super anxious kind of imposter syndrome day myself, where I was like, what am I doing? I don't really have any shoots lined up. Like, am I even like, can I call myself an artist? But for me, it always kind of comes back to resting on my laurels and knowing that like I think therefore I am. So like especially as queer people, we have the power to like fully define ourselves within our own image. And part of my image for myself is like, I am an artist. I'm a professional artist. I'm a good artist. Even on the months I don't have a lot of bookings, like I still have pieces up in the museum in Greenville, you know? So I'm still like, I'm always like on that same level, even if it doesn't feel like it sometimes. And you know, for me, I don't really have a quote unquote side job or whatever. So I feel like it could be a little easier said than done, but I don't know. It just has to happen for me too. I couldn't imagine living any other way.
Of course. No, and I think it's super interesting because I work in a gallery here in New York. And of course, the entire mission is to sell. And so many times, you know, it's billionaires that walk in and it's the only focus is like, is it an investment or how much is it? Or it's all about the numbers and like the business side of it.
Yeah.
And less about, I guess, the conceptual and like what an artist actually does and like puts their heart and emotion into it. And I was living in Appalachia years ago and I had two friends. They were a queer couple, artist couple, and they almost acted as like mentors of sorts. And the relationship was so special and I learned so much. But I remember one time we were having lunch or something and he said, like there's an easy defining factor to like if you're an artist or if you're not. Like, do you sell? Do you make money from it? And I was like, what? Like, I don't know if that's so not right. Like, regardless of if you sell or if you show, if you're an artist, you're an artist, you know? But I think too, like going back to that question is, do you feel the same amount, like, are you able to put your heart into those commissions as much as you are, or do you find, not as much as you are, but do you still have the same enjoyment and get the same fulfillment from your practice when it is a commission other than, I guess, your like solo work?
Yeah, I think they scratch different itches for me. I think that my personal work I make because I have something I want to say or I have someone I want to honor with my lens. And, you know, with the other work, it is just like really a love of light and a love of my medium and being able to just share it with people, especially as like a lot of the people I work with aren't photographers. They don't know much about my medium. They just want pictures of themselves. And so I get to kind of share this unique process I have and build with light, which is I love light. That's why I do what I do. At the end of like, that's why photography is my medium, is because light is my medium. And yeah, so I think they just scratched like different itches for me. I definitely love them both equally, but my dream would be to just sell the work, you know, but I'll be totally honest, I've never sold a piece in a gallery or anything, but I totally consider myself a professional artist through and through.
Oh, as you should.
100%.
Yeah, no questions asked.
Yeah, I've met a lot of artists where like you have to sell or you have to make work that's sellable. Not even that it sells, just work that is marketable to be considered an artist. I was at a residency with a guy that was like that. And I was just kind of like, why are you here? Like,
it takes away from it, does it not?
Yeah, how, like, that's so limiting to your exploration, to your medium. Like, he was a painter, he's a sick painter, but he made the most boring paintings I've ever seen, and it's because they were marketable. It's like plants and animals, they were gorgeous, but I was snoozing. And he had such a like a big brain. I was like, you can make such cool stuff.
Yeah, I feel like that can also be a really interesting line too, where, you know, it's like wanting to be, and I'm not saying this directly at you, but in general, it's like, who wouldn't want to be a working artist and to fund their lives through their work? But to have the marketable or the sellable work based off of the market, it's like, do you alter your practice and like take, especially because our work is so personal and so intimate, and to share that with the world is a huge step. But yeah, just thinking about that. And I'd love to hear anybody else's thoughts too. I'm going to stop rambling. Thank you so much, Carmen, for saying all that.
I really wanted to jump in because this is like maybe a can of worms, but I think that part of queerness is not being a productive member of a American capitalist colonial economy. And so whenever I hear that, well, what are you selling? There's a little flag that goes up. It's like, why do I have to be earning money? What does that prove about what I'm doing? And I think like I am very blessed to be able to use the thing I love, making art, to make a living. And I think like, I wish that on everybody, but I do think it's worth just remembering like there's problems with that line of argument that like selling is what matters, or selling is proving value.
Yeah, just listening, talking about jobs and careers as an artist and stuff like that. As someone who's gone through different transitions as an artist, my undergrad was as a graphic designer, and essentially I went back to school because there was at a certain point where I felt in the South, as a masculine-centered woman, I couldn't go up any further within that career. So I went back to school and decided to, I thought I was going to go back into doing my master's within graphic design, and then realized I wanted to get back into making, and then switched to something that was more in studio art. And I spent over a decade as an event photographer, tried to do the hustle, and it's like just one of those things for me. It's like, I can't do this hustle. And similar to what Emmy was talking about, really having this imposter syndrome in regard to photography, because then it became this thing. It's like, well, I'm just doing event photography. And so, all these pictures I take on the everyday, that's not really art. It's just me taking candid pictures every day, until I started looking at other people's work and really recognizing it's like, oh, I shoot just as well as them. I'm an artist. It's very valid. And, thinking, maybe I should teach, and, was working as a graduate teaching assistant and teaching those classes, and still feeling it's like, well, maybe, I'm still not really an artist, and just finally getting to a place of resolving to that, like most people say, it isn't about just selling things and wanting to just lean into to just make. But I also, have that understanding there is a little bit of a privilege to just resolving to, I'm just going to make what I want to make, as opposed to, there are some people, they have to make to be able to survive. So, even with producing these Dragon Coalesce shows, feeling like, well, this is a different part of my life. That's not really artistic, but it's me supporting other people's creative aspects and part of my social practice. And that still is being an artist, supporting others in what they're doing also. So as a lot of people have said, there's still a lot of validity, and regardless of what creative process we're doing, it's like we're still artists, whether we're selling, whether we're encouraging others or supporting, being allies with them. There's a lot of that within that.
Kind of jumping off of that, kind of when I'm making work that is more, I guess, doesn't really have a personal meaning to me, more like a commission. It's sometimes a relief, because I can just turn my brain off and just kind of make what they want from me. But I kind of enjoy kind of work that I'm paid for. It tends to be more like generic work, which sometimes can honestly be nice, because it's like I can kind of just turn my brain off and practice a little bit. And I can kind of take that practice with my kind of commissioned work and put that work back into stuff that means more to me. Because I do have this weird line where sometimes I just really like making like super generic portraits, because I can just paint and not have to put much of my own mental kind of thought into like internal dialogue into it. But then I find that I get really excited when I make something big and for myself, and it's centered on my identity. So I feel like it's kind of a balance of using the more professional side as like practice, and then putting that back into my own work.
It was interesting what like Cher said about graphic design, because, and I hate to keep relating it like I did before, but I feel often like for me, it all coincides together, because I feel like monetization in the world is so like, it's everywhere, unfortunately. That's just kind of the world we live in. And I feel like that relates to like productivity, to like, if you're not producing something or don't feel particularly inspired to, you're kind of forced within this nature of the world, like you have to keep producing or you have to make something, and then it's often not your best because you're forcing it out of yourself. And I always found this interesting, what one of my mentors said, but she basically said that even if you aren't technically producing anything, there's still validity that you're exploring yourself either spiritually or mentally, or you're moving in life to find your next subject that you want to touch on, or finding new techniques, or sketching, or Pinterest boards. There's always work in everything that you're doing, even if it's not actually producing it yet. I always try to tell myself that, because sometimes I don't have any ideas for something and I don't feel like there's validity in that, but then it's like, oh
Yeah, I definitely relate to like a lot of the things that everybody has said so far, especially just like as of now, like this very second, like I'm currently at a job that I'm in for the summer. It's a Christian summer camp as a photographer. And it's just like, yeah, obviously I'm not doing the most elaborate shoots and it's just candid photos, just like Cher said. But it's just like, I mean, it's right now I need this job, you know, it's just definitely like a privilege of some people, they may not need to do that kind of work and just focus on their art because just, you know, just basic needs like living and stuff like that. But unfortunately, just right now, I'm just a first generation student, just graduated. Like my parents don't really know anything about just like, it's just, all of this is just very new to me, like getting an apartment, just all these things, right? So I would probably have to do something that is not as creative as I would want it to be for the moment and things like that. And just around the lines of what Park said of just asking if it scratches your itch as much as like other things. And in the case of like a job like this, definitely not. It's just like every day it just seems very repetitive and just kind of like I want to like do something fun. And but then at the same time, it's, at least for me, I think it took me a while to like consider myself an artist just because I didn't think that I was able to be present for the conceptual part of art. Because I think in being in classes and being in things, I recognized that I had an eye for composition, I had an eye for color and certain things. But then it was just like people would ask, but what does it mean though? And then it was just like, oh, like, I don't really know. Like I just want to make cool things. But then I think with time, with experience and just like life experiences and like certain things, that's when I stopped myself, and there was no other way to get that emotion out of me except for making certain pieces or getting that translated in art. But yeah, because I just love editorial, love fashion photography, and that's like I think my brain's kind of like divided into two, where it's just like more like fun, colorful. Like as a kid, it was for a form of escapism, just like seeing all the magazines and just like super girly like things. And then in my brain it was just like as a little boy like in the South, full of just around like super religious Mexican Hispanic people, it was just like an escapism. Like just I would look at the magazines, look at the color, look at the glitter, and I was obsessed with it. And I think just I fell in love with photography like that. But then as I grew older, like I said, I just went through things that I had nothing else to like, I had no other outlet other than like my work. And that's when it became more conceptual. And that's when I was able to like work on that side of things more.
All this is very much resonating with me. I think we all struggle with being artists, especially being queer artists, with imposter syndrome or not feeling valid in our identities as both an artist and as both a queer person. But I think for me, what helped me, I guess, is like going to the root of why I feel like this. And it's always you know what Michael was saying about capitalism. We were taught our whole lives that our value and our worth are tied to our productivity, how much money we made. So when we relax or we sit still, if we're not productive for a month or 2 months or a year, if we're not making art all the time, or if I'm not, you know, even being in the queer community, I felt at one time that my queer identity wasn't valid because I wasn't going to the queer parties or the clubs as much, you know, because I was working. And people will make you feel that way. And it's like we're already on the margins of society. You know, we're on the margins of capitalism. Capitalism put artists on the margins of the economy. We're already on the margins of mainstream culture being queer. So you always feel invalid because of these structures and systems. So a lot of me reconciling my own imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is realizing that was the cause of it. And if I don't make a piece for 5 years, and I'm actually a kindergarten teacher, I teach little kids and we paint all day, and I feel like that's enough. I don't have to create a piece for a show in 5 years, and I'm still an artist, and I'm still a teacher, and I'm still queer, and I'm still who I am just because I exist, you know? And so a lot of that, we had to like really dig into the root of the issue, and it is capitalism, colonialism, cis hetero patriarchy, and they're all like, you know, a three-headed dog all together. So I hope that helps anyone. Thank you. Sorry.
No need to apologize. Thank you very much, Kesha. And hello, Parks, and then Kimberly. That was awesome.
The floor is yours, Kimberly. Sorry for this interlude.
No, you're fine. Just kind of putting in what Kesha was saying. I think that it is very important for as queer individuals to participate. Well, I also don't like capitalism. Nobody likes capitalism. Like once, like when the more people like see of us, the more they realize that we exist and that we're valid. And so I think being as an artist, you're kind of unseen. You're like this unseen person. You know, people they see your work like in a gallery, but you know, not as many people like normal people coming through kind of stop to look. And so as queer people, I think that it's very important and like being somebody who can relate to like heterosexual like cisgender people and show that you are normal and your value and your identity and that you can function within this system and that you can, you know. And so I feel like in a way that makes you even more valid. But not saying that, you know, being a certain way kind of validates you at all. So
Even this notion, sorry, even this notion of hypervisibility and like always having to measure and everything having to be tangible. We always have to be seen. Our work has to be seen, and we have to be seen and valid and visible as queer people. That's also like a product of cis hetero patriarchy and capitalism. Everything has to be measured, visible. And I think we can also like take that apart as well and dissect that some more. Why do I always have to make myself so visible and be validated by the powers that be? I actually don't even really care about their opinion. So, you know, so it's like even these ideas of always having to be seen and validated, I think it's important to always question that as an artist, as a queer person, you know.
So one of my questions, like I've been through a journey of trying to navigate as an artist, then as a queer artist, just as an artist, period. Different dynamics as a single mom, as a woman of color. I mean, I've been trying to navigate through this world for a very long time. And my question is, how or what do you do when you're presented with burnt out? Like I am completely burnt out sometimes, just existing. So I would love if anyone can add to that, because sometimes I really get burnt out of like, I don't know, just how can I exist being who I am, show up who I am as a whole being, and I still have to play the game of capitalism.
You know, I run my own life, I run my own business, and I find myself getting burnt out very easily on that. And I've found the best thing for me is to kind of just let myself like be burnt and kind of like ride to the end of it, as long as I'm not like, you know, letting it debilitate me in my practice, like being mindful of it, but kind of just letting that burnout kind of like wash over me has been that's been a pretty helpful thing for me. And again, it does take a lot of mindfulness to make sure it doesn't get to a point where I'm like debilitating my practice or my lifestyle or anything. But I think, I don't know, I feel like burnout is always such has such a negative connotation to it. But for me, I've always looked at burnout as the times when my body, my brain, my creative self is telling me to like stop for a second and just act for myself. So be like, things I'll do when I'm burnt out are just like stay at home and play dress up. Like fashion is a huge part of my identity for me, so I'll just stay home and put on different outfits and make like a whole day out of that and my favorite music. And as unproductive as it can feel sometimes, you know, it letting that burnout, because the burnout usually comes from, you know, trying to present all the time to this kind of like society where we're in and having to kind of perform around, kind of bringing it back home and making it like something for yourself and centering yourself and not sharing it has been very helpful for me. And I hope that helps you.
Yes, thank you. Oh my God, that is just a sweet reminder of so many people in my community, so many folks that just tell me just slow down, listen to your body. Just listen to your body. So I received that. Thank you so much. Thank you. And Shara, I received that too. I can't wait to see you Saturday too. Besitos.
Yeah, I often, like, if someone were to ask me that, I don't even know what, like, on burnout topic, like, I don't even know what I would say, just because, like, I feel like if, like, anyone who is close to me or like sees me a lot, like, I'm kind of always doing something, which is like probably not very good. But to be honest, and I'm sure Jesus can say that, like, that, because it's like probably pretty bad. And a lot of the times it's not even for like monetary value. It's just because I derive so much like self-worth from like what I'm doing. Like often I feel very like foggy if like I'm not doing something, and I don't know what that is, and I can't give an answer as to how. But I as of recent, I'm trying to, and also senior year is coming up of university, so I'm just trying to like you know recenter, I think, a little bit, and like try to listen to myself a bit more, and like know that work isn't everything. But yeah.
I was just going to say, with burnout, I have gotten through my first year of grad school and I'm already like, time to get on out. Yeah, it's tough because, when you rest, people call you lazy, or when you rest, you're being selfish, right? And that's been really hard for me personally. I can't really offer you any perfect answers, but I can say I feel you, and I resonate with that. It's hard, and it's even more hard when you're isolated and in a place where people don't talk about being tired. People don't talk about the fact that they're like fatigued mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, constantly, because I guess it's not cute to talk about like burnout, or it's not cute to say, yes, I am a full participator in the Great Resignation, because we've had this like productivity, maximum productivity, shoved down our throats. Like I can clearly remember a lot of my schooling just telling me how to be the most professional, productive, neutral person. And so it's really hard to give yourself space to be emotional and erratic, and to say like, to just let all that happen. And so I guess like, it's kind of like what, Carmen and Cher were saying, stopping. First of all, just stop. Because at the end of the day, you're the captain of your ship, right? And stopping and just being selfish, I think, is a good thing to, be mindful of, is being selfish in a good way that's restorative to you. And that could mean a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're making art. It may mean that you're making in another way, or you're dedicating more time to like loved ones, or it could be a lot of things. There are other ways to be productive, right? And even looking at it that way is really wonky to me, because we're people. We're here loving on each other, trying to be like, hopefully just trying to live this life the best we can. And a lot of capitalism tells you yes, but also make that green. So it's just, I guess, yeah, it's tough. You got to be very selfish. And I feel like, in terms of like female or femme perspectives, there's a lot of, I've experienced just personally, there's a lot of expectation for females to just keep like soldiering on. And I do not negate that this happens for men or male identifying people either, but there is kind of this weird subversive or like passive aggressive way. People will try to bully you into not resting, and you just got to say, no, I respect myself, and I love myself, and I have the right to stop when I say I want to stop, and nobody can bully you into not taking that time for yourself. That's my TED talk.
I wanted to add, sorry, hi, I turned my camera off because I'm in bed. It's 3 a.m. where I'm at. But I wanted to talk about like how I deal with burnout, like because people also, when I'm burnt out emotionally, spiritually, just physically, your body starts to give out on you, and I start having breakdowns. But on the flip side, we do live in this capitalistic hellscape, and I just can't call into work when I want to rest, or take a nap or take it slow because I need money to survive. And I do a lot. Like I work full time in the day, and then at night I'm in grad school. I'm on summer vacation now, but I'm in graduate school getting my master's. And then I do a lot of other activities, roller derby, my art making, rowing, like all this stuff. And what I do is I wake up when I know I'm burnt out, and I say, okay, like what is the bare minimum you have to do today to survive? And so I cut a lot of things out when I'm burnt out. Like I still have to go to work because we need money to survive. I just can't call in. But if I have things to do after work, I don't do them. If it's not necessary, I just don't deal. I don't do them. I go home and I rest after work. I won't make anything. I won't go to any of my activities. Sometimes I won't go to class, and I tell my professors I'm not coming. So I just kind of bring everything down to what's the bare minimum necessary for today to survive today.
I am so grateful for that. I've been practicing those boundaries. But like for me, it's just like the hardship of my reality of being a person of color and living in survival, kind of like 75% of my life. And also like having to fend for my seeds as well. So it's just like being an artist is like a privilege sometimes in some spaces for me to say that I'm an artist, right? And so the burnout affects that imposter syndrome, like I'm not really an artist. And then my ethics, like sometimes I don't want to talk about my sufferings as a person of color. I just want to make something beautiful. I just want to make something colorful. I just want to make someone think, right? And so when I get burnt out, it's like when I see that my sufferings or like my people's sufferings are being posted or being like marketed or sold, I get burnt out with the fact that my personal ethics are being challenged, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, it takes a toll on me mentally, and then physically, my body reacts to that. And I cherish everything that everyone is adding because it's just like affirmation of you already know what you already know, and adding more new wisdom to me navigating through these spaces is who I am fully. So thank you so much.